Hello, my name is John Mayer, and I'm the Executive Director of CALI, the Center for Computer Assisted Legal Instruction. The video you are about to watch is from the annual CALI conference held at the University of Michigan School of Law in Ann Arbor, Michigan on June 4th and 5th, 2026. Most U.S. law schools are members of CALI. CALI publishes over 1,400 interactive tutorials that teach the law to law students. Faculty can also use LessonLink to create formative assessments using CALI lessons. CALI publishes casebooks by paying law faculty to write and review books that can be adopted in many courses in law school. These books are free to download from our website, or print versions can be purchased at near cost. You can download the PDFs or even the Microsoft Word versions of most of our books and add your own commentary before distributing to your students. $300 casebooks are a thing of the past, and adopting one book from CALI saves you more than your entire institutional membership. If you would like to learn more, email me at jmayer@cali.org. I would be happy to visit or zoom into your school to talk about CALI.
Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Podesta Crane, and I do not have my microphone. And I am a law librarian at Penn State Dickinson Law. Give me a second here. Okay. I don't have a pocket. Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me. And the title for this presentation is From Passive Consumers to Critical Evaluators, Teaching Legal Research Students to be the, quote, humans in the loop. And I have divided the session into 3 sections. And you can see at the bottom here, I have the QR codes for Google Sites and my LinkedIn page, Google Sites. I'll have these at the end of the presentation as well. The Google Sites has the 2 things that I'm going to be talking about, the 2 assignments, and then also some references to some of the resources that I am mentioning, and then also the slides themselves. So I have divided the talk into 3 sections. The first one is professional identity formation. And here we're going to be talking about taking student perspective seriously and providing them with some guidance about using AI. This is not working. Second, not sure why my slides aren't working. Second is human in the loop. We will be operationalizing this vague concept and talking about it specifically in a legal research context. And then we'll be talking about class exercises. So the first thing we want to talk about is professional identity formation. And it is my belief that learning to use technology and thinking about how you integrate technology into legal practice is part of professional identity formation for students. And you know that the ABA requires that all law students be given opportunities for professional identity formation throughout their law school careers. So student attitudes towards AI are complicated. I'm sure many of you have seen in the news commencement speakers getting booed whenever they mention AI. I think anybody who's actually talked to students about this or is not entirely surprised that that kind of thing is happening. Students do have complicated views on this. Many of them have conflicted or even negative views towards AI, and that was mentioned in the keynote. A lot of them have problems with environmental issues or bias or what they see as stealing intellectual property. I think a lot of this is also fueled by job anxiety, but I don't think that's all of it. I think they really do have a lot of very valid concerns. But even amongst students who have real reservations about AI, you see a range of attitudes when it comes to actual professional work. So I have a lot of students who don't like the technology, but feel that, it's here, it's not going anywhere. They need to learn how to use it for their career. So you'll get that sort of conflicted view from students. And since we're talking about students, really, academic integrity weighs really heavily on their mind. I've had students talk to me in office hours and writing in reflections. In legal research, a lot of the things that we traditionally grade are done out of the classroom, and many students are worried that if you are saying that they can't use AI for a particular assignment, other students are not following that, and they kind of, without ratting anybody else, have said that to me. And I think for me, that's really probably the number one concern I have right now, is how to deal with academic integrity issues. In terms of my classes, what I teach a section of the 1L class. So we are very fortunate at our institution. We are separate from legal writing. So we have a lot of independence on how we structure our assessments and conduct our class. We are a 2-credit graded class. I teach as part of a team. So I don't have as much freedom as I do in my upper level class because we all have sort of shared major assessments, etc. I also teach upper level. Traditionally, I have taught something that was called civil litigation research, but really it was just ALR, and I used civil litigation hypos. Next year, I am going to be teaching AI and legal research. For the upper level class, it's a 1-credit, 7-week class. For both classes, I teach pretty much the same AI based on the idea that once my 1Ls are upper levels, things will have changed so much that I will probably have completely new material anyways. So my required AI content in my classes, I have a 2-week module on AI. It will be talking about the first module, and the second module deals with prompting. And I'm not really going to be covering that in this particular section. So for my 1Ls, we do this at the end. It is a 14-week class, and so AI, we do what one of the speakers at AAL last year called mini moments. So we have little bit of AI weaved in, but then the real AI is in weeks 12 and 13 of a 14-week session. And then for my upper levels, I do it right at the beginning. First week is secondary sources, second week is AI. I also have a discussion board where I go out and find things. I do not have my students read scholarly articles because they're not going to do that. So instead, I pick things like blog posts and podcasts and things from Law 360. Everybody gets a different assignment. They write about it on the discussion board. I also have them do a reflective essay for course takeaways, and I give them 2 options. They can write about AI, or they can write about course takeaways in general. About 2/3 of the students choose the general course takeaways. About 1/3 choose AI. And most of the students who choose AI are really the ones who don't like it and want the opportunity to tell me all about that. And I don't want to be dismissive about that. They tend to be very well articulated, very thoughtful, sometimes quite raw exercises. Then we have the starter kit take home, which is one of the exercises we'll be talking about today. So module 1. This is my module for AI. Again, there's 2 weeks. We will be talking only about the first week. So the prompting we won't talk about here. The way my class runs is we have 2 hours. So I have 50 minutes, 10-minute break, and then 50 minutes. So usually it's lecture, database demo, break, and then hands-on exercise. So for the lecture, what I do is I have statistics on AI use in practice. And every semester I have to get these fresh because there's always new statistics. We talk about, use in practice over time, in different practice environments, what kind of tools people are using. Then I have an anonymous survey. And this is something we did at one of the AA, sessions last year, also at Penn State, where I am from, some of the internal trainings, and even an EDUCAUSE training. So this is a pretty standard sort of thing to do. I give them a spectrum from a doomer to a resistor to an adopter to an enthusiast, and then skeptics who think this is all overrated. I ask them anonymously to put themselves on this scale and give me reasons. I use Canvas's anonymous survey tool, so I have no idea who is saying what. And I tell them that I am going to tell them my own feelings after they are done giving me their feelings. And I do that. I do my own self-disclosure. So I let them know that I am somewhat of a doomer when it comes to this technology. I don't trust the people with the technology, and I don't trust the technology itself. At the same time, I'm also sort of an enthusiast because I use it pretty much every day in my work. I particularly use a lot of Claude. I do think it's very useful for legal research, and I do think it's something that they need to learn. And when I go through the anonymous surveys, most of my class is kind of in that range. They may have different concerns than I have, but a lot of them have concerns, but also want to learn more about the technology. So after we're done with this introduction, which I think is really important that they're getting it somewhere, our law school does not right now have anything dedicated to where everybody has to take something on AI. So my sense is they don't really have an outlet where they can express their views. So many of them seem very anxious to be able to do that. So I've been doing that in my class, and I think it is a good thing. Again, this is part of their professional identity. This is going to impact their careers in major ways. After we're done with all of that, we start to discuss the role in practice. So that would be the lecture portion. We take our break, and then we do the citation analysis exercise. So when I'm doing my lecture, I actually do give advice to my students. I tell them, this is how I see the world. Take it or leave it, but this is what my advice to you would be. And the first thing is that they should gain familiarity, even if they have concerns about the AI. Again, most of my students are already there, but I do, like the keynote speaker say, I do have some strong resistors in my classes. Not many, but they are pretty vocal whenever you have them. So I do tell them, this is something, it's probably not going away. I can see it being implemented in firms. Like my sister's a practicing attorney. I can see that it is happening. The tools are getting better. This is something they need to learn about. A lot of them talk about cognitive atrophy. I've actually had them use that word, which makes me wonder if they are, parroting something they read, because that's not usually how students talk. And a lot of them will talk just about learning and wanting to learn foundational skills first. So all of that is very valid. But what I would say to that is, we don't want to have what I see as almost a little techno-determinism in saying that, you're going to lose your thinking skills if you use this. I think we have some degree of agency, and we need to be very intentional and reflective. Honestly, that's really the only path forward that I think we actually have. And that feeds into the next thing, integrating AI into the research process instead of making it the entire research process. And that is the central theme for this talk and something I really try to instill in my students. So the dangers associated with AI integration. So the goal, this is what we'd like to happen and what I honestly think is something that is achievable. And this kind of comes from Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence book. The idea of a person working with AI, on average, generally speaking, can achieve better results than just the person alone or the AI without significant human intervention. So that's the goal, or at least that is my goal. But as we know, the companies that develop things don't necessarily have the same goals as end users. And a lot of people know this now whenever we're talking about social media. Social media's goal is to keep you engaged on the platform for as long as humanly possible. that may not be the end user's best interest. So the concern with AI is, and I have a quote here, that AI defaults to doing the work for the human instead of working with the human. So that is kind of what I want my students to try to avoid. And I teach them using Ethan Mollick's 4 co-intelligence principles from his book. We focus on the first 2, and I just mentioned the last 2. The first one is always invite AI to the table. And what that really means in practice is if you're doing something, see if AI helps. If it helps, it helps. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. Just try it out on a lot of different things. Then be the human in the loop. That's going to be the rest of this presentation. Treat AI like a person, but tell it what kind of person it is. That is prompting advice. It doesn't apply in every situation. And then finally, assume this is the worst AI you will ever use. So that's how I deal with professional identity formation. Now we're going to move on to the human in the loop framework. We're going to start by talking about the phrase human in the loop generally, and then I will talk about a framework that I developed for explaining this to my students so that they understand what it is that they're supposed to be doing in legal research. So most of you have probably heard this phrase. Many of you probably don't like this phrase, but it's everywhere. So I have 2 examples here. The first one is from Thomson Reuters, where they're talking about embedding humans in the loop. And they say that is to ensure accuracy, ethical compliance, and alignment. The second example comes from Harvey, where they're talking about human in the loop AI usage. They say that the user plays a critical role in verifying output and confirming accuracy, jurisdiction, and relevance. I think the human does more than that, but we will get into that. This phrase, as I mentioned, it's very vague. It's all over the place. It's very trendy at the moment. It has reached some criticism. So this is a really interesting blog post by Cory Doctorow, a writer many of you probably know. And he talks about how humans are not naturally good at being the human in the loop. And oftentimes the framework will just be like, just as long as there's a human supervising, everything's cool. So it would kind of be the human on the hook in some cases. So his quote is, human in the loop is the cure-all response to any objection to putting an imperfect AI in charge of a high-stakes operation. And to which he says, sure, AI is imperfect, but guess who else is very imperfect? People. So his other quote would be, humans are wildly imperfect, and one thing they turn out to be very bad at is supervising AIs. And he talks about automation complacency. He also raises issues like sometimes when the humans override the AI, it is to actually insert the sort of bias that the AI is supposed to be there to prevent. So sometimes it doesn't work out the way they expect. Also, another critique is that not all humans are interchangeable. And this comes from a judge, the Honorable Scott Schlegel, who writes a lot and does a lot with AI. This is from a blog post. And he talks about humans. There's a difference. A 1L is much different than a judge or a partner in what they bring to being the human in the loop. The partner or the judge has a lot of experience, a lot of expertise, and a lot of confidence in their abilities. Now, I've met someone else with a lot of confidence in their abilities, but a lot of them are a little afraid of overriding the AI, and which is understandable. They're just learning. So when we're thinking of human in the loop, not all humans are the same. And when we're talking about human in the loop, lawyers are a specific kind of human. So it's not just human in the loop, it's lawyer in the loop. And when you're a lawyer, you're bringing in your professional responsibilities. That is competence, but it's also supervision, which is really weird because, you don't really have a supervisory role over PowerPoint, for example. Instead, you don't supervise that, you supervise, say, a paralegal. So this is sort of an evolving way of thinking of the role of the lawyer. So I take all of that and I work with it for my students. And so I have developed this framework for kind of explaining to students what it is they're supposed to be doing in legal research. So we can tell them to be the human in the loop, or we can tell them to supervise the AI, or tell them to use professional judgment. But they don't really understand what exactly it is that they're supposed to be doing. And that is because of the nature of the AI. So traditional legal research forced judgment at every step. I use a version of the Rombauer method. I suspect most legal research teachers use some variation on that. And if you're not familiar with it, it starts with secondary sources and sort of identifying the issues, so sort of the brainstorming at the beginning before you start looking for primary law materials. And then after that, you look for codified law, statutes, regulations, that sort of thing, then binding precedent, and then finally persuasive authority. So this was developed in the print era where you literally picked up a different book for each step. And it does translate into traditional electronic research. It is the structure for thinking that I give to my students. When you are looking at a report of AI, it delivers both the citations and the analysis and all the different types of primary law materials all at once. So the student writes in a prompt, and then they get what I call an AI report. So when I'm saying AI report, this means if you're in Lexis or Westlaw or Bloomberg Law, or even something like Harvey or Claude, and you ask it a legal research question, and it gives you analysis and supporting primary law authority. I'm calling that an AI report. And that's what our students get, and they wonder, other than checking that, make sure these cases actually exist, what is their role? So being the human in the loop assumes the human's role is obvious. And streamlining this research process where you go from prompt to this report with analysis really removes those spaces for the exercise of human judgment. Back in the day, you were looking at the statute, you selected the statute. You were looking at the binding materials, you selected those. And all of that kind of gets smushed together in AI. So I've created this framework to sort of explain to my students what it is that they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be the human in the loop for legal research. And I have 3 rules. They are sequential. One is strategist, the second is analyst, and then the final is decision maker. So strategist. The goal here is to identify and articulate the research issue. And the tools would be secondary sources, other background materials, and then brainstorming. So this looks a lot like the Rombauer method or any other method where you do a research plan before you do your research. And for each of these rules, I have a subsidiary. And the secondary rule here is translator. And this would be taking all this beginning work, which could include Googling around, could include looking at secondary sources, just like you would do in a regular research environment, and then taking what you've learned and translating it into a prompt. Very similar to what you do in electronic research, taking what you've learned and making a terms and connector or natural language search. So that's the first place where they are using their judgment. The next place is the analyst, and this is when they get back that legal research report. So they have to evaluate the quality and the usefulness of what they're getting out of that report. And how they do that is, again, exercising professional judgment, but also using traditional resources and techniques. And here, your sub-rule is called scout. And you're seeking completeness, not just accuracy in the research. So what I'm saying is they have to look at that AI report, see what is cited in it, but then work beyond it. Go and see if what's missing or this contrary authority, that sort of thing. And then finally, decision maker. And this is really a mindset issue. We really need to drill into our students the mindset that they are the one doing the research, not the AI. They are the decision maker. And here, the goal is to actually select authority to rely on in your final product, and that requires professional judgment. And the secondary role here, I called it communicator. That's not a great word, but it encompasses both oral and written communication. And the goal is to explain why the cited authority supports the legal analysis. And I do try to impress upon students that, they can't just rely on the AI, because they might have to talk to somebody about the work product. They might have to answer questions from a supervising attorney, or be in front of a judge. So they need to actually know what it is they are doing. So that is the framework I have developed. And now we're going to talk about 2 exercises where I implement that framework in my legal research classes. And again, these are on that Google site, and I'll have the QR code at the end. So before I talk about these, I want to mention that both of them focus in on the analyst and decision makers. So they're not talking about the strategists or creating the prompts. And there's a couple reasons for doing that. First of all, I have a whole separate class I do on prompting. So it's not that I think prompting isn't important. We do cover that just somewhere else. Here, focusing on the analysis lessens the cognitive load. They don't have to worry that they didn't find the right thing. They can analyze the stuff that I am giving them. Also, another reason is many students believe they can prompt their way to the right result. I can hear them saying this to each other in small groups. They have had them say it to me directly to my face. As long as they know how to prompt, they're going to know how to do everything. And they've heard the word prompt engineering. They think that's the ticket. And the problem with that is it reduces research to a matter of input rather than inquiry. So what does that mean? They think that they can go in the AI. Maybe they have to iterate within the AI, but they think eventually the AI is going to give them the quote unquote answer, that they don't really need to go outside the AI. And I want them to be looking at the AI as one tool in their legal research toolbox. And so I really push that. The AI report, that is not legal research. That is a tool for you to use in doing the legal research. You are the decision maker. You're the one who selects the cases that go into the final product. So the first exercise is what I call a citation analysis exercise. And the overview of the assignment. So what I have is a list of cases. I do the prompts. I have a hypo. I do the prompts. I've run them in different places. I ran them through Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg Law, and Harvey. So I got research reports from all of those. I have the actual research report from the AI, but then I pull out the cases that were cited and I put them in a table for the students. And then they have the cases. Then they have another column. Would you use this in your final work product, this particular case? And then they have a column for notes. Then what they're supposed to do is review the cases, but then also expand upon them. Use the headnotes and citators in those cases to go out and see if there is other authority that might be useful. And then what I have them do is select. So this would be the decision maker part of my human in the loop. I tell them to pick 6 cases from anything that was in the AI report or anything they found on their own. And these would be the 6 cases that they would cite if they were writing a brief for one of the parties in the hypo. And just like a phrase or a sentence justifying why you chose that case. So the goal here is that mindset shift from just verifying what the AI gave you to professional judgment. So a lot of times the way I see things framed is that students are supposed to be asking themselves, are the cases provided by the AI real? I mean, that's important. And are they described properly? For my students, I tell them, I'm just going to hope and assume that you are not going to be submitting hallucinated cases to people. Like even my aunts and uncles who are not lawyers have heard about this stuff in the news. At this point, you should be cognizant of that, and you should be at least shepherdizing. So I'm not so much worried about that, but I really try to explain to them even the traditional legal research tools will do things like create quotes that aren't actually in the case or misstate the holdings of the case. So they need to be looking for that. I find that to be necessary but insufficient. Instead, I want this mindset shift to really, they remain the actual researcher. So what they really should be asking themselves, the better question is, what cases should I, the legal researcher, cite as the best authority for this issue? Cases or regulations or whatever the actual law happens to be. And that was the question you were always asking in a traditional research environment. You were asking, is it you selected the cases? And that's really what you continue to be doing, even if you have this AI report. You are not just quality control for a robot. You are the person in charge. So part of this is something called citation literacy, and this comes from a legal writing instructor, an article called Citation Literacy, which I thought was quite good. Citation literacy is pretty simple. It's just the ability to read and write citations. The problem in law school is we spend a lot of time on the writing citations. They spend an inordinate amount of time on whether this comma should be italicized or not. And that's not our fault. That is the fault of basically the Blue Book. The Blue Book is very complicated. It takes a long time for our students to master it. So when they're spending all this time mastering the Blue Book, one of the things that kind of gets dropped is the idea of reading citations. And reading citations is important because citations communicate meaning. That's true whenever you see a citation in a court opinion. It's also true when you see a citation when you're looking at one of these AI reports. The citation tells you a bunch of things right off the bat. You can see which court you're dealing with. You can see if the opinion was published or not. You can see what year it came out. So they should be reading citations for meaning and thinking about them that way. And Alexa Chu's article, which I highly recommend to everybody, has this great quote from Justice Scalia. It's Justice Scalia and also Brian Gardner. Lawyers must evaluate statements not on the basis of whether they make sense, but on the basis of whether some governing authority said so. Well, really, they have to do both. But the governing authority said so is very important. And students need to be looking at the things cited by these AI reports in terms of, is this the, binding precedent from the highest available court, just like they would do in a regular research environment. So assignment logistics, they get the hypo, they get the report, they get that table of cases I was talking about, and they submit everything in Canvas. The way I set this up, I mentioned we usually have lecture and database demonstration for the first half of class, and then hands-on work for second half. This one I did like 30 minutes as an individual. Then they all have small groups that they have for the entire semester. They meet with their group, and the group picked the 6 cases that they were going to submit and submitted them as a group. And they're very familiar with this because I teach this way a lot. One problem with doing things in class, and I don't know a real solution to this, is you don't have the time to do really true research because you've only got 30 minutes. So I tell my students, they can rely on the AI summaries of cases, which we talked about a little bit in one of those AI mini moments. They can use the headnotes. They can, look at the editorial enhancements. They're not obviously going to be able to read 6 to 8 cases in 30 minutes and then build on them. And in terms of finding other cases, I specifically told them for this assignment, use the citator, use the headnotes with the key numbers and the topics, and that's how to find additional cases for this particular assignment. And then it was really neat because I took a hypo that I had done in the quote unquote before times. So this was a hypo where I had students who doing traditional research do the research. And then I can compare what the traditional research looked like to the AI reports and then what the student groups came up with. So I had a couple different data points, and yes, I did feed that all into AI and had it make the nice little tables for me. And basically what we found was that everybody got the seminal case. Everybody got the really big one, But beyond that, there was a lot more variation than I, quite frankly, expected. So when do I do this in the course? We talked about this a little bit. For the 1Ls, it's after they learn the foundation. So they already know how to use a citator. They have learned how to use headnotes and key numbers. This would be week 12 in a 14-week sequence. For the upper level class, and my upper levels are usually almost always mostly 3Ls. Maybe I get 1 or 2L who got into the class. It's right after secondary sources. So I do that in part to kind of show how these AI reports have the same sort of rule as a secondary source. In the legal research process, you can use them at the beginning to sort of get your lay of the land and get some tips on, what the main authority in the area may be. The results and limitations, I thought it went well. It does reduce cognitive load. This idea of they're not having to worry that their prompt wasn't good enough. Everybody used the same prompt. Everybody is working from just analysis. And again, that goes beyond prompting. A variation. So this is really nice. And again, this is a legal writing professor's paper that I'm working from. The idea of creating a wish list. And a lot of legal research instructors actually do a variation of this. And all it means is before having the students work with the computer, have them ideate, have them think about what court would be the best court that you would be able to find authority from. What would that authority look like? What would it have an elements test? To the extent they are able to know that with the background that they have for the hypo. Thinking about what it is that you're actually looking for before you go looking for it. And what that does is it creates a benchmark, and it's a benchmark that they trust because it's a benchmark they came up with on their own. Now, that's a good thing to do, but I ended up not doing it whenever I reran this in the spring because, quite frankly, it took a ton of class time, and I just didn't have time to do everything. My sense from doing things in the fall was I just, quote, had too much stuff in this first AI module. So that was one of the things that got cut there. So my second exercise, and this is what I call the legal research starter kit. And I did this with my upper levels. This was a take-home assignment towards the end of the semester. I did this. This was actually a smaller assignment because we had Thanksgiving break and then you have finals. So I actually gave them the bigger assignment earlier, and then this was kind of a follow-up assignment. An overview of the assignment. So I gave them a hypo, and then I gave them a start on the research. So I gave them 3 different AI reports to use, and then I gave them also sections from treatises. These were links on Canvas. And then also practical law actually had something on this particular hypo. I gave them the most pertinent key number, the headnotes for the key number, limited by jurisdiction, and I gave them links to the pertinent statute, the annotated versions in both Lexis and Westlaw. So they had a lot to start with. Then what they had to do, and I told them they had to do additional research, review all of this and expand it, and then come up with their completed research, which was like an email memo that they just uploaded to Canvas. This is kind of like the next gen bar. For the questions that are not multiple choice, some of them, the students will be getting a case file. It might have a memo from a managing partner and something from the client, and then they'll have secondary sources and primary law. Then they have to go through all of this stuff. They will see that some of the stuff is more useful than others, and I kind of did that with the stuff I gave to them. So they have to sort through all of that, and then the next gen bar, they might have to say, identify gaps. What else would you need to know to be able to answer your legal research question, or go ahead and answer the question? And that's what they're doing here. They're going through a whole bunch of different things and identifying gaps and finishing the research. The assignment logistics, again, I gave them the hypo, links to a whole bunch of resources in Canvas. I gave them 3 different AI reports here. This was done in the fall, so we did not have Harvey yet. So I gave them Lexis, Westlaw, and I gave them something from my own personal Claude account. This was good because they could look at different AIs, looking at pretty much the same prompt and the different information that you get even out of different AIs. They had to draft their answer, and then they had to do a reflection. And part of the reflection prompt was to talk about the AI. How did it compare to other resources? Did they find it useful, etc.? And for the most part, I would say my 3Ls were not fans of AI at all. They were really, really people who did not like the technology. But most of them said it was okay. You know, they were useful. They didn't rely on it entirely, but the AI didn't really mess anything up, which was actually true in terms of the responses I got out of the AI. So the benefits. I really like this assignment. I'm probably going to do it again. Again, you're lessening the cognitive load, so they do have to do some research, but they have a good starting basis for doing that research. They have some treatises, they have their AI reports to start with. And again, that helps them evaluate the AI in context so they can see what the AI looks like compared to, say, a treatise. So they can compare and contrast the strengths and weaknesses of those. And then to a certain degree, it levels the playing field. It equalizes students because everybody has access to certain AI answers. And that's something I'm really struggling with for the 1L classes. Sometimes we let them use AI, sometimes we don't. But even on the assignments when you say you can't use AI, it's very difficult to police that. This is one way of making sure everybody kind of has equal playing field. For my 1Ls, remember, I teach as part of a team, so I don't have as much control over the assessments, the graded assessments for that class. But what I was able to do is we all use the same fact pattern, but I was able to tweak the final exam to have one question on AI. And what I did was I had them look at AI report and then traditional secondary sources. So I did this in the final. I'm thinking about doing a version of this maybe earlier when we're talking about secondary sources next year, and we'll talk about that why in a second here. So what I did was a compare and contrast. I have students who like Lexis. I have students who like Westlaw. So I gave them a Lexis treatise, just the pertinent sections of the treatise, links to them, and then the AI report, and then I did the same thing for Westlaw. I told them they could do either Lexis or Westlaw, or they could do both. Very few students, I guess in retrospect, not surprisingly, very few students actually did both. I told them if it was me, I would read all of it to get the background information, but that's not what they did. So they were busy 1Ls, so they only chose one or the other. So the goal and some of the prompts were kind of leading them in this direction was to see that AI is not necessary. People who've been doing legal research for a long time before they had AI reports, that they do have traditional resources like treatises. And the prompt kind of explained it like, you may be working for a firm that doesn't have the top of the line Lexis or Westlaw products. So, would you still be able to do research? Unfortunately, that was not really what they got out of it. I guess it is fortunate that they were pretty honest about their evaluation. And a lot of them said that they liked the AI report better because the treatises were, they weren't focused on the jurisdiction and the facts, which is true, but also many of them mentioned they were hard to read, which is kind of, a chilling and somewhat unsettling thought. So, but at least they were honest. And I do think this points out to a larger problem with the students and the AI. Students often think of the AI as providing the quote unquote answer to the question. And then they don't like to use secondary sources because it feels like to them it's an extra step, where oftentimes they have a similar function. And this is true even of the students who don't like the AI. I think part of the problem is they say it's usurping their ability to think, but not really. Only if you think that the AI is giving you the answer. If it's just one tool in your toolbox, then maybe that will help reframe it and they will have a little less AI resistance. That is one of those works in progress in terms of me being able to communicate this effectively to my students. So I'm still working on how to sort of get them to where I want them to be on that. So finally, in terms of takeaways, first of all, my way of teaching this is really grounded in Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence. It's a few years old now, but it has a nice framework in specifically telling the students to be the human in the loop. And I took that phrase and I kind of operationalized it for legal research, gave them some rules that they could play to be that human in the loop, ways that they could use their judgment as a strategist, an analyst, and a decision maker. And then finally, we had the 2 hands-on exercises that are focused on evaluation and selection of authority. And that's what I've got. And again, we have the Google Sites and LinkedIn. So I think I'm pretty much on time. So does anybody have questions? Sure. Okay. And do you intentionally choose any like bad AI reports to show them, a more flawed result? And first question was, do I have explicit AI literacy? I do not, in part because, we're teaching a million things and now we are now teaching 1,000,001 things. So I have 2 weeks and then, like I said, those mini moments, so some of the mini moments are a little bit of AI literacy in them. And do I show them bad reports? I am not doing that intentionally. Now, sometimes in the prompting, they manage to create bad reports. And they look at each other's reports in the prompting exercise that we didn't talk about. I will say I did have a great example of that in my upper level class. So I had given them a report to look at, and I can't remember if this was part of this exercise or not. But anyways, one of the students, while I was talking, ran my prompt through, I won't say which one of the services, but through one of the services. And he raises his hand, he says, Professor, I ran your prompt and I got the exact opposite answer out of the AI. So I told me X, and X was pretty much the correct answer, and it had told him Y. So that was great. I mean, I could not have set that up if he was a plant. So yeah, they do run into it themselves. Any other questions?
Beyond the scope of your talk, focus on research, but online someone said that the agentic AI, where you have 24 systems doing, this is doing drafting, this is doing research, this is doing, pulling in from playbooks, that human in the loop, it will not be sustainable because they all much to look at, backlog of material and burnout, and that the responsibility will have to shift back to the AI developers. If you expect someone to oversee 20 bots doing, research all at the same time, there can't be anything.
Yeah, that keeps me up at night. I know. In doing this, I was going to put a caveat. I'm talking about like right now, the technology we have right now, and I do have some of those readings for agentic AI because our students are fairly conversant in AI, but they had some vague notion of agentic AI, but not really. And once they learned about it, they seemed quite concerned about agentic AI, which I am concerned as well. I do think that that's something for the legal profession to really keep the human in the loop and keep our profession, having a profession that governs itself is actually a very good thing right now, and being able to push back and use our agency to have these points for professional judgment. Or again, that's the only answer we can possibly have, I think. Yes, please. are more likely to produce false results because they want to please each other or deadline. Tag on each other. So obviously the extent, right, is one pretty, but it is the bot instead of being antagonistic or collaborative in a way that actually makes them more like a shortcut or. Do you think so? Nice.
Either way, how do we help them embrace balance and respect?
So the question is, are they getting more resistant or less? And how do we help them embrace it? Again, I only have very small n's in my study, but I will tell you, my 3Ls, my upper level class was mostly 3Ls. They're extremely resistant, but again, they self-selected into my upper level class, so they may not be super representative. I don't know over time. I do see things in the Chronicle. I think there's more coverage of it within the last 6 months. Certainly since we've had these commencement speakers get booed, I think it's come into the public consciousness that, hey, you know, the kids aren't all into this. So I do think that, I don't know if there's more resistance. My sense, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, I think I've seen statistics where the American public in general is getting more resistant towards AI. And I would imagine that they are similar. In terms of what I tell them, this year in spring, I changed my little spiel that I give them. I told them that I used to tell them, you know, use this stuff, don't use this stuff. I don't really care. This year I told them, no, you know, I can see these products getting better. I mean, and I can see them being implemented in firms. And this is something you really need to know how to use. And I will say, I had a student come in office hours, and she told me that, you know, she had some very bad experiences as an undergrad with people in a group project. But, you know, she was on a job interview and they asked her because the firms want to implement this, and they were asking her, and she was very happy that we had covered it in class and she was able to like talk knowledgeably about it. So I think, like I said, most of them, I think, have a lot of concerns, as do I, but they understand, you know, that this is not going away, basically. Was somebody over here first? Okay.
Even if you're telling yourself it's just a tool, you are now dictating the way the rest of your thinking process goes on because of that.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely, I am familiar with that, and there's different takes on that because a lot of times people say start with the AI and work from there, and other people say no, you know, you have to step back, which is just traditional legal research, Wambauer method sorts of stuff. Is you go to secondary sources, maybe you Google around, and you get a lay of the land before you start doing your serious research. So I do try, that's sort of what I'm trying to tell them in the strategist, is that you would do that sort of thing. Nicholas Minginelli, hopefully it doesn't butcher his name. He has the Tech Bros article that he wrote, talks about grounding your research first in, you know, edification, in human stuff that has gone through an editorial process. And so I think that can be useful. But again, if you're grounding yourself in a treatise, you're also grounding yourself oftentimes in a particular worldview. So I tell my students to read them both in tandem, to read widely, to read a couple AI reports if they can get their hands on that, and a couple treatises if they can get their hands on it. But again, as we mentioned, they're not super keen on doing a lot of reading. And I guess as 1L is like all they do. So I do think my 3Ls are much more likely to do that than my 1Ls. But I think the 3Ls are much more in tune to practice experience, and they are more keen at looking at secondary sources and looking at a variety of sources. Anybody else? Sure.
I've been thinking about this as like about where AI is the traditional growth research process. So kind of like how like AI is sort of
Mhm.
like human the whole process where the AI is, but that's not how students I think are going to experience it. Like they're probably going to experience it by just like here's the report I got and I can look at people. And I just wanted to highlight Amanda Watson and Alex Trace's article where they kind of like break down raw file methods even more, like all the places where assessment comes in. And I think your exercise like highlights that really nicely, that they're like kind of adding some of those steps back in to like the like look back, look forward, what ideas are missing.
Yeah, so that was about Allison Drake, Amanda Watson's article. It's something about next gen bar and AI. I don't know the exact title of it. And yeah, so they go through and they actually talk about critical thinking skills, I think is how they frame it. And they walk through all these sorts of steps. And some of the steps I have here actually do overlap with their steps, like this idea of having the students ideate first before they touch the computer. And again, that's not a new idea. A lot of different legal research writers and professionals already do some variation of that. We have any more questions? Oh, okay. Great. I will try to make it work. If not, I will post it on my LinkedIn. So that way, if the LinkedIn one works, then hopefully, or if you're already following me on LinkedIn, hopefully that will work. Thank you for letting me know that. Isn't technology grand? Anybody else? Are we at time?
This is exactly.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, everybody.